Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I know this is a little bit of a different lecture than you're probably used to. I saw the schedule of just the luminaries that you have as part of the camp this year, and I'm so impressed, and you're probably wondering who I am and like why I'm here, but we'll get into that. Today's presentation is called Purpose, Power, and Popcorn, How the Movies and TV Just Might Change the World. I'm gonna give you a heads up. This is gonna be a very interactive session. So I will ask people to unmute themselves and give answers. We're gonna talk about things. We're gonna share some feelings. It all has a purpose. I hope you all really love it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat as well. I wanted to share that my name is Rachel Cooke. I'm a communications professional by trade, which means I used to study a lot of public relations and communications. I worked for a lot of big brands like McDonald's and Walmart. I used to do PR for Sheryl Sandberg, the former CEO of Meta, for a while. And now I somehow get to work in the movies. I work for a company called One Community, which is a social impact entertainment company. We help produce and co-finance big movies like Just Mercy with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx, the Aretha Franklin biopic that had Jennifer Hudson in it, and a couple plays that are on Broadway right now. So you're probably wondering what we're gonna talk about. We're gonna talk about our favorite movies. We're gonna talk about what social impact entertainment is. We're gonna learn about, the science of storytelling. We're gonna talk about trust, and then we're gonna tell you a secret that I probably lied about at the beginning of the presentation. It all makes sense, trust me. All right, so first, we're gonna have people unmute themselves. I would love to know, what do you watch for fun? Anyone can share.
The Gilmore Girls.
Major change.
Paula, why don't you go first?
Oh, sorry if I interrupted you, but okay. Well, I usually watch YouTube videos about documentaries about how some stuff is made. Like, for example, I think there's a video made by a channel called Insider, which exposes about how a lot of things are made, like sugar, jawbreakers, and a lot of stuff. And also other content on the content like TV series clips, or also video game videos, basically walkthroughs, or person or a stream, basically.
Who else has something to share? What do you watch for fun? TV, movie, anything?
I like Conan O'Brien, so.
All right, Conan O'Brien. I'm seeing in the chat Breaking Bad, Harry Potter, Avengers Endgame, horror movies, sci-fi, very nice. Anime, Rick and Morty, a classic. Gilmore Girls, okay, that's a show too. Stranger Things, very good. Star Wars, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing some of yours. I will share some of my favorites because fair is fair. Oh, maybe I won't. Okay, here are 3 of my favorite things to watch. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a classic movie. If you haven't seen it, please do. It's amazing. Steven Universe, an amazing animated that was on Cartoon Network that ended just a couple years ago. And because I am from DC, West Wing is amazing. Just the first 3 seasons, and then it totally falls off, so just watch the first 3 seasons. But what I am trying to tell you with these is that each of these projects, Roger Rabbit, Steven Universe, and the West Wing, all had other motivations. So even though that you're watching these big blockbuster shows, right? This movie cost millions of dollars, it made millions of dollars, TV show launched careers of several actors, right? Even big things like Hollywood blockbusters usually have a social message to it. And what we do at One Community is create movies and TV and other projects that have a social mission in it, but we first know that we have to get you into the seats. My boss, Sonia Lockett, likes to say, we like to hide the spinach and the brownies, right? You're not going to get the social message. You're not going to sort of learn the lesson if I can't first convince you to see the project, right? And so my work is a little bit different than, say, people who make documentaries, right? Who are making movies that have a very explicit purpose, right? If you're watching a documentary about climate change, it's a very explicit purpose. If you're watching a documentary about a true crime, right? You're usually trying to solve that crime. The projects that I work on are sort of a little bit more subtle, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So first, what is social impact entertainment? It is definitely an emerging field of entertainment where projects, again, it could be TV, film, theater, social media content, all those ads that you watch before your content creator on YouTube, all of those things are part of bringing attention to an issue. It brings an audience into proximization to a cause with the ultimate goal of educating, uplifting, or amplifying an issue that might spur an audience to action. And so often people think that this just means that I'm trying to create an emotional response. And absolutely, TV and film do an amazing job of eliciting emotional responses, right? They make you cry, they make you laugh, they make you think. That's really great as well. But every single type of media, whether it's TV or theater or short form, all require a different sort of set of dynamics in order to cause social change, right? And one thing that I know for sure is that TV and media are a really great vehicle for social change because everyone watches it, right? Even anyone who replied in the chat, you have seen a movie, you have seen a TV show, you have watched several hours of YouTube or TikTok like I have, right? And because you're sitting there in a captivated audience, it is a perfect vehicle to give something, to give on an audience more than just entertainment. It's a really great way to sort of give people a chance to see a different perspective. And so here's a question, mic off, now that I just shared some things with you here. Can you think of, or do you think of what you're watching as just entertaining, as just entertainment? Or do you already realize that perhaps Hollywood might be trying to share some sort of message with you? Thoughts? Paul, I can't tell if your hand is raised up for this one or last one, but if it is, feel free to.
Oh, yeah, well, I think it depends on the content. Like, for example, there is some entertainment that is just made for that entertainment. For example, reality TV shows or contest shows. I think those are just to entertain and distract people from things. While, of course, there are TV series with a narrative or a novelistic format that tell a well thought out story, and they transmit sometimes very adult and mature messages, and also like as you said, they cater to your emotions. They make you feel things, they make you cry, they make you laugh. And yes, as I said, it depends on the content.
Great, okay. Nicole, I see that you say, I always realize that they're trying to sell a message. I see Timothy sort of agrees. This is what I'm trying to avoid. Okay, so it seems like there might be some mixed opinions of what they're doing, what Hollywood is trying to do, but most of the time you all agree that there is a message, right? All right, so here are some very popular shows in the US at least, right? That perhaps we don't really think about of having a message. Will and Grace. Obvious or not obvious message? Feel free to mic off. Just talk to me.
Obvious?
Obvious. What makes it obvious? There is no right or wrong answer, so feel free. Oh, a fun thing about me is I will pick you from random. So let me just go through my little Zoom scroll. I'm gonna pick Timothy Gregg from Oregon, maybe? And just see. Timothy, have you heard of Will and Grace?
No.
No? Oh, Timothy, you wound me. Just tell me I'm old already. All right, who has heard of Will and Grace? Raise your hand. All right, Kylie, I see you. Although perhaps I should not call on you. Who else has heard of the show Will and Grace? Oh my stars. Just call me old. Just call me an old hag at this point, babies. All right. Will and Grace was a very popular show in the early 2000s. It was about 4 people, Will and Grace, who lived together. They were not a couple. Will was gay, so was Jack, who's on the end of that sort of card, and her best friend. And so it was a show that truly sort of revolutionized TV and showing the lives of LGBTQ characters, right? In a way that just really hadn't been done on television, where a network was not using coded language, right? It wasn't at all a surprise that these characters were gay. They dated, they had issues. They also had really normal personal issues like a bad boss, or not being able to get a job, or not knowing what you want to do with your life, or going through a divorce with a millionaire, you know, things that we all go through, right? And so it was a really relatable show. All right, what about Law and Order? Has anyone watched Law and Order?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. but
Yeah.
not too much.
All right, is there a message behind Law and Order?
Well, in my opinion, the
Yeah.
the title of the movie, well, the series kind of gives it out. Crime, law, that kind of thing. But in my opinion, in my opinion, I find it's very boring. In my
You find
opinion.
it very boring?
Yeah, I find it's boring.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brianna. Anyone else feel like Law and Order might have a message?
I think is really specific series actually, because there's a lot of criminal things in all this world, but this in a specific treat about so delicate topics, but are really important ones. And I've heard that in the 70s there were 70s, there's a lot of crime of this type in specific United States. So this one of the reasons why this old entertainment worlds began to put all this kind of help for parents, and also the situations that could happen with your kids, because it's much about kids and teenagers that have violence and abuses. So I guess have a really clear message even for kids that, or well, teenagers that see this series. So I guess it get what they trying to share with all of us.
Yeah, exactly. Law and Order is a very interesting show in that it really truly gonna gave you this, it just really hammered home the idea that like cops are good, right? Cops are inherently good. They're out to solve crimes. They're determined. They'll stop at nothing, but they won't break laws in order to sort of meet the end of the law, right? And that like prosecutors are also good. They're all out to do the good thing, right? Law and Order is a format. It has not changed over the 20 plus years that the show has been on the air, which again dates me, but it is an amazing show that really hammers in the message of that there is law and order out there, that in a world that feels very chaotic and very divided, the cops and the prosecutors that prosecute crimes are out there on our side, right? What about a much older show? And this is for all my sci-fi lovers out there. What about the Twilight Zone? Are there messages in the Twilight Zone? Anyone who watches sci-fi? Has anyone heard of the Twilight Zone on the show?
I have.
Yeah.
I remember
Liam, I
seeing.
see you. Okay. Who else has
Remember
watched the Twilight?
I remember seeing one episode it was called The Eye of the Beholder,
Mm-hmm.
and that one kind of had an obvious message where it was a world where basically humanity had evolved to, and there's like it went through like this person who was going through this plastic surgery to look like everyone else. And then at the end, you realize, no, everyone else is ugly. She's normal, but that's now considered ugly.
Yeah. That's
Which
a
is-
pretty good episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
she's
the
actually like a pretty beautiful actress.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to show is that social messages in TV have been around since forever. The Twilight Zone first aired in 1959, which is actually way older than I am, in case you were wondering. And Twilight Zone actually started in a response to Rod Serling, who created the Twilight Zone, his response to the Emmett Till murder, right? Here was a white man in Hollywood who was known to be one of the most prolific sci-fi TV writers of his time. He heard the news of Emmett Till, and I will quickly summarize the case for those who are unaware. Emmett Till was a young Black boy who was 14 in Chicago. He was from Chicago, but he was brutally murdered in the South because a white woman said that he whistled at her. And this is back, obviously, in 1955. Her brother and her husband basically sought him out and murdered him. And it was one of the most horrific cases of the civil rights era, actually the beginning of the civil rights era, because Emmett Till's mother was doggedly determined to get her son justice. And she took the brave stance of showing his pictures of what he looked like after he had been brutalized and basically drowned to the public, so the public can see what racial violence looks like in America. And it really was one of the most sort of like impactful moments of that era, where people were actually really confronted about the racism that existed then and still exists now. And Rod Serling desperately wanted to show that story to America. He knew as well that TV was one of the mediums that he had control over, and that he could create a powerful story to let people know the prejudice that happened. Unfortunately, back then when Rod Serling was making the show in 1959, TV censors had a lot of say. They could absolutely rewrite scripts, they could cut things, they could censor things, right? So he was not able to actually get that actual story of Emmett Till on TV, but he learned then that metaphor and allegory could be possible, right? So instead of a story about a Black man in the South, he was able to use aliens, right? He was able to talk about beauty standards by flipping the story on the head, right? In the story that we just heard before. If you haven't watched the original Twilight Zone, I very much recommend it. It's one of the best shows on TV. Here is an amazing quote from Rod Serling, which I'll quickly read for you. "You may have to tell them a story of prejudice in a parable form, in which they may step aside as a third person and cluck and say, 'Tisk, tisk, how awful we treat our minority groups.' But at least they know it's an evil, and they will recognize it as such. And by osmosis or some incredible process, will somehow along the line be faced with a situation in which they too may have to exercise their prejudice and be conscious of it as an evil," right? So even through parable, which is what I do a lot in my job, and what Hollywood does a lot in your superhero movies and Law and Order, in Will and Grace, and other really popular shows, we're still able to convey a message about an important social issue. That's something that the writers really want to bring your attention to. And often you can't just tell people, right? You just can't hit them over the head, and we'll talk about that in a second. But through these sort of parables, they're able to sort of let it sink in the back of their mind, and it sort of comes out in different ways as they live their life. All right, we are going to take a very quick quiz. Oops. The quick question is, and this is actually something that you can put in the chat. The first question is, what percent do you think Americans are victim of a violent crime? What percent of Americans in the continental US and Canada and, or not continental, in the United States, sorry, do you think Americans are a victim of violent crime? Put your answer in the chat. All right, 40%, 80%, 12, 30, 15, 60, 11, 5. Ezekiel, I like what you're thinking. Florence, 50. Okay. I'm going to reveal to you the answer, right? So I was talking before about how Hollywood can do a lot of good, right? That they can tell you really important stories, whether it's a parable about Emmett Till, whether it's talking about the real lives of LGBTQ Americans and really helping establish what sort of that movement looks like, right? And those messages look like, but also Hollywood can get it wrong sometimes, right? So to answer my question, less than 1% of Americans are victim to a violent crime, but TV will tell you that about 70% of Americans are victim of a violent crime, either perpetrators of that crime or victims of that crime, right? And so sometimes Hollywood just gets it wrong. We sensationalize stories, we drum up the drama, we try to like make it really sell, and sort of, as the saying goes, sex sells and so does violence, right? But when we do these things, when we tell you that all these victims of violence are out there, we then feel, as people who are consumers of that content, that the world is really scary, that there is a danger around every corner, that anyone in your life could be a serial killer and you can be, you know, the main character of a podcast at any moment, right? And that is also the danger of this vehicle, of medium, of using storytelling to convey facts, right? And I think it's important that we recognize that as consumers of information, to always question what is real, what is right, and how does this serve me, right? So I just wanted to give you a little heads up about that. I fully believe that as much as I love TV and movie and Hollywood, that storytelling is one component of an overall picture in order to create social good, right? That TV and movie and film, like, and all that stuff falls under the category of culture, right? They are pieces of culture, right? Some movies as big as Black Panther, which was a huge cultural moment, right? Or a movie as big as Coda, which really changed the conversation around disability rights in this country, right? All those create cultural touchstones, moments where people can sort of watch and rewatch and visit, right? But in order to create true lasting social change for good, you need other components. You need a policy component, right? You need politicians who are out there writing good legislation, of fighting for good change, right? You need people who are willing to vote and like put those people in office, right? And then you have the activists, right? People who are willing to often put their time or money or bodies on the line in order to force the conversation for change. You can't have any of these pieces alone to create lasting change, right? Legislators need to know that there's a culture around them where people accept what they want to do, right? That you need to have enough public goodwill in order to fight for, say, same-sex marriage, right? And in order to get those legislators to move in that direction, you need activists to be constantly hounding them about it, to be calling them, to be emailing them, to be at their door asking for change. All of those pieces together create a lasting social change. So that brings me to this part of how are we feeling about the world today? I just shared with you a stat about how violent crime stats might be a little bit different, but there are real world problems in front of you, especially as a generation. There's climate change, there's distrust in our political systems, there's the job market, there's housing, there's a lot going on. How are we feeling? Feel free to mic off, share your thoughts.
I think the system is about to collapse in a few 10 years approximately. Like if what media is, let's say media is always right. What they say about climate change and political systems, they're all gonna fall apart. And there is too much pressure everywhere with international conflicts, and it's not a good prognosis basically. So
Yeah. I can't see who said that. What's your name that just said that?
Máximo Moronta from Argentina.
Maximo, we're going to come back to your idea at the end. Brilliant. Don't forget it. All right. Who else wants to share about how they feel about the world today?
I think people focus too much on the problems and less on the solutions,
Okay.
and also the successes that people have had.
Also on the successes people had, yeah. Social media has made it really popular to just show your best self, your best world. And we all know, as people who live every day, that life isn't always just like beautiful picnics and flower dresses and daisies, but life is sometimes really hard. Anyone else want to share?
Well, I think that probably the media system, all that kind of stuff, are falling apart right now. Not in 10 years. I think they are falling apart. I think we achieved like a point of misinformation really hot. I think it's falling apart, or it will be, or it will fall in a few months.
All right, well, scaries, but you may not be wrong. Anyone else want to share about how they're feeling about the world today?
For me, I just somewhat feel like everything is publicized, right? So I remember my teacher, he was saying that we're actually living in one of the most peaceful times in, the world. But the thing is, we never know it based on how we're constantly fed certain information. Like there was times, especially like when the Victorian eras and all those times, they were at war constantly, all the time. Like I remember, who was it? It was Henry VII. He was there, and I know I'm going into history, but that's fine. He was there, and he was usurped so many times, and that literally barely happened. No, the only time I even seen a case similar to that is like in Sri Lanka. So for me, it's like while we're dealing with certain issues that are definitely specific to this generation, I feel like we should also admit that it could be worse. So that's just my.
That's true. That's a very good point. Certainly, by all statistics, crime is actually pretty down. More people have more money now than they've had in most generations. Housing is not bad, and yet it doesn't feel that way. That's very true. Anyone else have anything they want to share about how they feel about the world today? All right, I bring this up because you all are the next generation of STEM experts. There is a lot of weight on your shoulders. People are looking for this generation especially to invent basically every solution to every world problem that we have. And that has to be a very scary and very sort of like unmanageable burden. And so if I can help you do that, like take that burden off your shoulders, right? I know someone in this group is going to invent the next renewable like resource, or the next space engine, or gonna absolutely figure out a cure for cancer and every other disease that ails us right now, right? And as part of being a STEM expert, especially right now, is you have to learn how to communicate with the general public, people who do not have a background in math or science. And in fact, people who actually have a great distrust of math and science because of where the world is right now. To share some stats from Pew Research study that was done in 2002, 29% of US adults say they have a great deal of confidence in medical scientists to act in their best interest. That's down from 40% from November 2020. So definitely the COVID pandemic had a huge impact on public's trust of scientists and the science community. 29% say they have a great deal of confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interest. This number is huge, right? If you can't believe that scientists are actually out there looking for cures to better your life or giving you interventions or other things to help you live either a cleaner life or more healthy life or more mentally balanced life, then up against a huge challenge. But scientists are not alone in the lack of trust, right? 24% say that they have a great deal or fair amount of confidence in elected officials, right? Part of this is just a shift in public confidence in all of our institutions, whether it's religion or government or scientists, right? And so that means when you as STEM experts go out there to tell people about your latest inventions or interventions or studies or research, you're sort of up against a lot of stuff, right? You're up against social media, you're up against unboxing videos, you're up against beauty tutorials, you're up against Twitch live streams, right? And so as scientists, I know you are all probably very much wanting to fact check or correct a falsehood that you might see online or that you might hear online, right? But what we know from science, and this is also from a study done by Harvard, is that when we repeat a falsehood, like saying, for example, this is completely false, like saying the sky is, or chemtrails are fake, for example, right? Which was a huge thing on the internet last year, right? When we repeat that falsehood, when we say it out loud again to debunk it, right? Even if you're using an amazing research article that has facts and studies connected to it and the most experted person on the panel to talk about it, it actually reinforces that falsehood in someone's brain, right? So it almost is like when you are trying to convince someone that their falsehood is actually false, it basically creates sort of like this white noise in someone's brain where they literally cannot hear it. They will not recognize it, they will not engage with it, and they do not believe you, right? So instead of trying to go one-to-one of trying to correct a fact or a falsehood with a fact, what might be better is for STEM experts to then think about what lies beneath what that person is telling themselves. What are they valuing? What are they believing? How is that belief keeping them safe or making them feel that they are safe? How does it make them feel they have perhaps the moral high ground? How does it make them feel better about their lives, better about what they're doing, right? Rather than sort of trying to correct that falsehood. And this is actually what Hollywood does really well. Hollywood is not going to go out in an Avengers movie and tell people that climate change is a lie. They are going to find a way to talk about the values of it, why you should believe that climate change is real in a fun science fiction movie, in a horror film, in a Captain America film, right? They will do it in those ways rather than trying to confront someone about their belief. And this is because there is a lot of science around storytelling, right? Storytelling is programmed basically in our DNA. It's part of who we are, it's how we evolved as people, understanding our place in the world. Stories existed before even our written language, right? And so because we are programmed to hear and receive and respond well to stories, then storytelling is a really great way for scientists or engineers or mathematicians to tell the story of their work, right? If you're looking at a functional MRI scan, right, your brain lights up in a different way when you are hearing a story. And that brain sort of neural pathway is more than just like you processing the language, right? It's also about you processing the emotion that arises from the story. It's also about hearing the sounds of someone speaking to you. It's also about being emotionally involved, right? There's this really great study from Harvard that shows when you are listening to stories, you are imagining yourself in that story. And that imagining of yourself in that perspective literally puts you in someone else's shoes. It gives you a way to see a different perspective, and it helps us shift our core beliefs in what we think is true and what we think is right in the world. There's the Harvard scientist, I think her name is Jennifer Neely, did this great study. When we listen to stories and we're able to then come out of that story and then apply what we've learned in that story to our real life. And stories also help us shift sort of broader attitudes, right? Not only do they have us talk about specific situations, right? Like, what would you do if you were wrongly accused and sent to jail, for example, right? The other question is, what would you do if your friend was in that situation? If you were in a place where the politics and government was completely different from your own, how would you adjust to that situation, right? How would you adjust if you are in the near future and there is no water and you have to build a community in order to survive, right? TV and movie stories, which is what TV movie really is, gives us a really wonderful way to imagine and shift our own perspectives and to like dig into like our personal truths about why we feel what we feel. I'm going to show you sort of a more science-backed storytelling exhibit, and then we'll talk about it. It's a short video, it's about 5 minutes. Buckle in. Let me know if you cannot hear in the comments.
I want to tell you a story about a little boy named Ben. Ben is 2.5 years old, and Ben has brain cancer. And Ben's really happy. He's happy because he's been through 2 rounds of chemo and radiation, and he feels good for once. He doesn't feel yucky, and his father's enjoying seeing Ben's happiness. But as the father tells the story of Ben and his cancer, the father's voice begins to break. And he says, it's very difficult to play with Ben because Ben thinks everything is wonderful, but I know something that Ben doesn't, that Ben's dying. And he talks about how difficult it is to play with Ben, knowing that in 3 or 6 months, Ben will be dead. And yet Ben is so happy, he's so beautiful. And so the father tries as hard as he can to enjoy Ben, to be joyful around Ben. But then he says in the middle of this short story that it's an amazing thing to know how little time one has left. And as he says that statement, he has merged himself with his son. It's as if the father himself is dying. So in my laboratory, we've studied this story extensively. And what we found is that 2 primary emotions were elicited. One is distress, and the other is empathy. At the same time, when we asked people what they felt after the story was over, we really couldn't get very clear answers. So we began doing other studies on this story. So we took blood before and after, and we found that the brain produced 2 interesting chemicals. One is called cortisol, which focuses our attention on something important. So cortisol correlated with our sense of distress. So the more distress you felt, the more cortisol you released, and the more you paid attention to that stimulus. The second chemical release is called oxytocin, which is associated with care and connection and empathy. And oxytocin was correlated with people's sense of empathy. And the more oxytocin they released, the more empathic they felt towards Ben and his father. Now, we did something different after this experiment. We gave individuals a chance to share money with a stranger in the lab. And indeed, those who produced both cortisol and oxytocin were more likely to donate money generously to a stranger they couldn't see in the lab. In another experiment, we gave individuals a chance to donate money to a charity that works with children who are ill. And indeed, those who released oxytocin or cortisol donated money to this charity. In fact, the amount of oxytocin release predicted in both cases how much money people would share with a stranger or with charity. What we're seeing is that this narrative is changing behavior by changing our brain chemistry. So we decided to go a little further and ask, could we actually predict before they watched the video who would donate money to charity? So with funding from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, we reran the study in which we not only took blood, but now we measured heart rate and skin conductance and respiration. And using these additional measures, we were able to identify this distress response and this empathic response, and we could predict with 80% accuracy who would donate money to charity. These individuals get paid about $20 to be in an experiment, and the people who donated money on average donated half their earnings. So we began to investigate this story further. We used functional brain imaging to identify the regions in the brain that were most active while watching that video compared to a control video in which Ben and his father were at the zoo. And what we found was that the most active areas for the emotional story were areas in the brain associated with theory of mind or understanding of what others are doing, and areas that are rich in oxytocin receptors that make us feel empathy. And guess what happens when you watch 100 seconds of a father and son at the zoo? Nothing happens and people just blank out. There's no reason for them to attend to this information because nothing's happening. There's nothing exciting. It's important to understand that stories have to have this particular structure. 150 years ago, a German theorist named Freytag called this the dramatic arc. So there are particular story aspects that go into making an effective story: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then this denouement. The story of Ben and his father talking about knowing his son is dying has those aspects. It captures their attention. There's a coming climax. How can Ben's father actually engage with his son in this wonderful, relaxed, playful way, yet knowing that his son will die soon? It seems like there may be a universal kind of story structure. So stories are powerful because they transport us into other people's worlds, but in doing that, they change the way our brains work and potentially change our brain chemistry. And that's what it means to be a social creature, is to connect to others, to care about others, even complete strangers. And it's so interesting that dramatic stories cause us to do this. In these experiments, they do it in a very functional way. People are donating money because they want to help Ben and his father. And yet when we watch other stories or see movies, listen to music, the same thing can happen. We feel uplifted, we feel motivated, or we feel connected to others around us.
All right, so the voice that you heard was neurologist Paul Zak, who has done a lot of sort of research on the study of brains and narrative storytelling, right? And so as sort of STEM experts, you all were right. Thousands of white papers and research projects and synopsis and abstracts, all of those are really important for your field of study. I'm not doubting that, right? But when we tell stories, I'm not asking you to tell a story in a white paper. What I'm asking you is to, which is sort of boring by sort of nature. What I'm asking you is to tell compelling stories, stories that inspire, that follow that narrative, dramatic arc that he was talking about. Those stories can help us not only shape our brains, but bring strangers together, and they can move us to be more empathetic and generous human beings. And so definitely, actually, we take a pause here. Does anyone have any thoughts about the film that they just saw, the story about the boy and how that sort of translated into emotion and sort of empathy and etc.? Mic off is fine. Did anyone disagree with the logic that Paul Zach shared about why people responded how they did? Was anyone surprised? No? Okay. I mean, you all are very smart, so I trust you. I believe that you all know what you're doing, right? So again, as STEM experts, you're gonna have to learn how to tell these powerful stories, how to communicate with people about your work, right? And you have to also remember that people are visual creatures as well. People remember about 80% of what they see and only 20% of what they read. So on top of being really great at physics and understanding very important issues around engineering and all that stuff, you might also want to invest in learning some design skills as well, just to be able to communicate a story to an audience in the way that they receive it the most. And right now, social media is a huge competition driver for eyeballs and attention. So something about that. Now, Maximo, you said in the beginning that a lot of sci-fi movies are pretty bleak, right? There are very few instances where in the future we seem to get it right. And there actually is one really great example. And actually I lied about my favorite TV show, because my favorite TV show is anything in the Star Trek universe. And I'll tell you why. Because Star Trek is one of the best examples of sci-fi that actually gives us a hopeful future. It's the only one that really tells us that we got it right, that through years of conflict and civil war, at some point, because there was something greater out there, the human race banded together, got our stuff together, and went out to explore the stars. It is inclusive, it is a diverse audience, it is amazing. And so one of the things that I'm charged with in my job is to create projects that give us hope, that tell us that we got it right, that show people that it isn't just doom and gloom, that you're not always just gonna be a victim of a violent crime, or that the world is gonna collapse in 10 years. Because if that's the only kind of projects that I give you as an audience, I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that means that you all don't get to do the amazing work that you all are here to do, right? So I promise you that I will create hopeful and inspiring films that tell a great story so you all can continue your work and be amazing.